While 2 is probably the most popular of the classic games, Mega Man 3 isn't far behind, and I have to admit, it's my own personal favorite. Part of it is nostalgia, I won't deny that. This and 2 were the only ones I owned for the original NES, and I just took to this one a bit more. Beyond that though, this game has some of the most unique enemies and locales, as well as introduces the most of the series staples, outside of one, which started this whole thing. This game does so much for the series, and the crazy thing is, the team behind it originally planned for it to be so much more. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. I'm Wes, the Explosion, and today's topic is Mega Man 3 for the Nintendo Entertainment System. In the original Mega Man, Dr. Wily hijacked a bunch of robots from Dr. Light and used them to try and take over the world. In the sequel, Wily returned with a new group of droids, designed specifically for combat, and tried again. In Mega Man 3, we get perhaps the silliest plot of the bunch, Wily apologizing, claiming to see the error of his ways, and Light just kind of accepting that as cool, even welcoming him back to work with him again, this time on a giant robot Gamma, meant to safeguard world peace. Or domination, you know, if the wrong person got control over him. I don't even know what to say about this. Like, I get that he's one of your oldest friends, Tommy, and you want to repair your relationship, but this is a major leap of faith, and if Albert isn't there to catch you for this trust exercise, it's gonna be a lot more people than just you that gets burned. There's probably a reason why most adaptations take some liberties with this one, like giving Wily some plausible deniability and making some of the other characters still skeptical of the guy. Anyway, besides that, this one takes on a pretty epic scale, 8 robot masters being sent to newly discovered planets to claim energy sources to power Gamma, only to go off-grid for some reason, and Mega Man being sent out after them. Going to space kind of takes things to the next level. It leads to some pretty interesting locales while raising the stakes, and it makes most titles after this one feel downright tame by comparison. Only the 3 games divisible by 5 really venture into that territory again, with only Roman numeral 5 really leaning into it. Then there's also the introduction of Proto Man, who isn't revealed to be Mega Man's older brother until after you beat the game, having a sort of looming and mysterious presence throughout the adventure. Sorry for the spoiler, anyone who's been sleeping on this one for 30 years. Overall, this game's setting and story just feels much grander than almost every other classic title and really makes it stand out because of it. Even if a big part of the initial premise is, as I said, pretty stupid. Pretty darn stupid. Mega Man still jumps and shoots, don't you worry, but he can also slide now. Finally. This is probably my favorite function of his. You can use it to quickly dodge, fit in smaller spaces, and, if the pixel placement is right, even limbo under some attacks. It's such a simple maneuver, but dear me, it adds so much to gameplay. Not just with what you can do, but what the designers can throw at you. Alternate paths taking advantage of your shortened hitbox, stretches of smaller tunnels that have you constantly moving forward, unable to stop, faster attacks for you to react to, and some that'll make you have to determine whether jumping or sliding is the optimal way to dodge. The slide is one of those things that I consider intrinsically Mega Man, and when I play a classic game without it, I miss it. Not that I hold it against 1 or 2, since the creators just hadn't thought of that ability yet. And then there's the introduction of Rush, the other staple that I really think solidified the formula. Mega Man's dog serves the same kind of purpose that the magnet beam and items did previously, not being offensive, but helping him get around, with just a lot more personality. I'm not even a dog person, and I get a lot more joy out of watching Mega Man move around with Rush than I ever did with the flashing blue lines or the mechanical platforms. They could have just kept Rock's tools soulless, and that would have worked well enough, but giving him an actual partner that you could ascribe some actual character to, it made things a lot more fun. And also probably helped marketing a good bit too. But enough about how likable Robo Doggo is, what does he actually do? In this one he has 3 functions, just like the number on the game. From the get-go, you have the Rush Coil. Summon Rush and hop on him to have him launch you into the air with a spring. Nothing too fancy, but it is really helpful getting to hard-to-reach places or just to make wide jumps that you might not be comfortable with. I like it. The other 2 you get for beating certain bosses, the next one being Rush Jet. Climb aboard and Rush will fly you freely through the air, and given that this is a platforming game, I don't think I need to explain how helpful this can be. I love it. Then there's the Rush Marine. It's the same as the Rush Jet, just underwater, though you can hop around on dry land as well if you need to jump out for just a second or are in a strange mood. It's not bad, but given that Jet functions just as well even in water, I would have just preferred getting double ammo for that. Speaking of, Coil takes energy for every jump, while Jet and Marine tick down every second they're out. The ammo consumption is pretty reasonable, especially given how game-breaking Rush Jet can be, but how much you need to rely on them in some of the special stages is worth noting. Last game, you had ample energy for whatever you needed with one of the items, but here, the sections that require Rush are much longer, especially for Jet, and instead of giving you enemies to farm and refill, the game places power-ups in your path. These will fill you up faster than you drain, but they don't reappear if you die, so you either need full confidence to pick them up, or to kinda budget how often you pick them up so that you don't doom yourself if you do fail. This one calls for a bit more strategy, though I can't say I hate it. And for the second time we get E-Tanks, a stashable power-up that will refill all of your health when you decide to use it. This time though, you don't lose them upon game over, and you can hold up to 9. There's also one other oddball item, these question mark boxes that will reveal a random power-up, anything from an E-Tank or extra life, down to weapon energy or life energy that you may or may not need. While it's never good to count on these things, they can net you some nice bonuses and are an obvious precursor to Eddie, who shows up in subsequent games. The weapons in this game aren't terrible, but as much as I hate to admit it, they are some of the weaker ones in the series. Search snakes work pretty similarly to the bubble lead, though it's a bit more aggressive climbing up and over terrain. Hard Knuckles travel slow but hit hard and can break some walls. Shadow Blade is just worse Metal Blade, with a smaller ammo count and shorter range, and while it has a boomerang effect, I've never gotten any use out of the rebound. It's still probably my favorite in the game. Gemini Laser is neat with how it bounces off walls, but you can only have out one at once, so unless something jumps into it, you're kind of a sitting duck. Thank goodness Needleman is clumsy. Spark Shot is just kind of an electric projectile, though allegedly it can stun some things. Magnet missiles are pretty darn good, changing course mid-flight to hit an enemy. They can help you hit hard to reach foes, or just make it so that you don't have to aim if you're feeling lazy. Needle Cannon is just a rapid-fire projectile that... Wait a second, I thought we were only allowed to have 3 shots out at once. Was that not due to a hardware limitation? Were you lying to us, Capcom? Or was it limited for balance reasons? Anyway, if the buster isn't fast enough, use this. And then there's Top Spin, which I still, to this day, do not understand. Get close enough to an enemy and use it, and you'll deal damage. Normally it's a lot, but sometimes it's not so much. Sometimes the ammo count drops quick, and at others, not at all. I'm not really sure on the hitbox either. I've seen other people use it while avoiding touching an enemy and taking collision damage. I've never figured out the sweet spot though, so against bosses that are weak to it, I normally just hug the enemy, mash the fire button, and pray that I kill them first. Which does tend to work. Maybe one day I'll figure out all the finer points, but to this day, even with as much as I've played 3, the Top Spin remains a sort of mystery box for me that I somehow stumble through using. Mega Man 3 has my favorite set of stages for the classic series. Part of it's the setting. Being set on planets beyond our solar system let them do some wild stuff, even if each facility is just a mine or an energy refinery. Gemini Man has a cool skyline above, and a bunch of shifting colors below, like an aurora. Snake Man's fortress seems like it's made almost completely of snakes. Shadow Man's lower floors have some sort of odd liquid running through it, though whether it's lava, oil, or cherry Kool-Aid is completely up in the air. Even with the more simplistic designs, like the rocky area in Hardman stage or what appears to be an electronics factory for Sparkman has such sharp sprite work that they're still pleasant to look at. In fact, on the whole, I'd say that Mega Man 3 is one of the best looking games on the NES, though that could be nostalgia talking. Point is, the visuals are a big reason why I enjoy this game so much. As for how the stages are laid out, I think they're all pretty well designed. When I first started piecing together my thoughts for this game, I was of the opinion that it was the enemies that really made things. Sure, there are stage hazards and gimmicks here, but they tend to fall by the wayside when I think about the major obstacles for this entry, like the cat and its arm balls, or the monkeys that drop from the ceiling and chase you down while jumping about. Then I thought about it more and realized that it was how well the different elements of each situation blend together that really make up most of the challenge here. The hornets that drop the bombs that split into smaller hornets are nasty, to be sure, but that you have to keep moving due to the robo-bear traps under your feet is what makes them really tricky. Likewise, the bolt-like enemies in Sparkman stage are easy peasy, but that you have to manage them while moving across the blocks that try to slam you into the spiked ceiling turns them into a major threat. There's the weird tadpole eggs that spawn enemies as you clear them out to open up a path that I don't know whether to classify as an enemy, obstacle, gimmick, or platforming puzzle. And one of the most memorable sequences in the game for me is fighting the giant snakehead while hopping about its undulating giant snake body. No one thing is really much of a threat, but since you're going to be dealing with 2 or 3 of them at the same time, it turns into a trial that's much trickier than the sum of its parts, and I think that's Mega Man 3's greatest strength when it comes to stage design. And on a similar note to the stages, the bosses in this game are also my favorite in the series. First and foremost, vying for first place out of all Robot Masters is Shadow Man. He's a ninja, he uses shuriken, which is also probably the best weapon in the game besides, and on top of all that, his backstory is that he's supposedly an alien robot that Wily found, refurbished for his own purposes, and took credit for creating. That's some nice flavor text. Besides that, we also get Magnet Man and Snake Man, 2 RMs that rank high not just for this game but also overall. The former also appearing almost ninja-like, with his face mask and head ornament, and the second giving off a more bestial feel, not just because of the obvious animal motif, but also the concept art where he's crawling about. Then you get your more unique robots, like Top Man and Needle Man, both based on things that wouldn't normally be considered threatening, though the second is awfully close to Spikes, and you have a lineup that really doesn't have any stinkers. Do feel a little bad for Sparkman though, him looking like he's missing a few things, like hands and skin. And not to leave anyone out, I love Hardman's rocket punches, and a boss that can split into 2 doesn't happen very often in this series, so props to Gemini Man. As for the fights themselves, you get your standard pushovers, like Top Man, the one that requires pattern recognition, like Snake Man, and ones that are a bit more unpredictable, like Shadow Man, with several being somewhere in between some categories. I thought I had Hardman down, but last run, he started doing long jumps instead of the high jumps with predictable head slams that I was used to. They feel like a good mix. What really gets me about them though is how vital the special weapons feel for taking them on. Most of them take only 1 tick of health from buster shots, but their weaknesses do good chunks, so it's really important to come prepared if you don't want it to become an endurance test. Well, that's not completely true. They each seem to have little to no iframes, so if you have amazing aim, you could probably rack up the damage pretty quick, but still, I don't think I'll be doing any buster only runs anytime soon. There's 2 weapon circles this time around, 5 of the bosses feeding into each other, while Snake, Gemini, and Needle have their own cool little club to themselves. That means even if you or I want to hit them where it hurts, we still need to take on at least 2 of them vanilla. Another interesting note is that each boss is weak to their own weapon. Super Harpuya gave me that hot tip on one of my clip shows a few months back, and recently I was able to confirm it. While it won't help you during the original matchups, it can be a pretty good alternative for the boss rush, if one weapon is easier for you to use or Topspin just inexplicably burns through all its ammo during the Shadow Man rematch. On top of them, you have Proto Man running around, and he is annoying. Can I say that? He just kinda hops around, shooting, and if you're not on a flat surface, he can be kinda troublesome. Never really the highlight seeing him. And once you clear all of that, you get the Doc Robots, which are these broad-shouldered gents, 8 in total, that perform exactly like the Robot Masters from the last game. Is Mega Man 2 your favorite game? Well, guess what? It's Mega Man 3 now, since you get both rosters here, 2 for 1. Most fights are exactly like your last go-round, complete with their unique rooms, other than Quickman and Metal Man. They removed Metal Man's conveyor belt, which makes things simpler, and gave Quickman a flat floor, which is disappointing, since that means he no longer gets stuck on bumps. Still though, the big challenge this time around is remembering their patterns while at the same time figuring out which of your new weapons will work best in place of your old ones. It's a really neat challenge and another thing that sets this game apart. I go back and forth on whether I'm glad that it's unique to this game, since it seems like the sort of thing that could get old quick, or if it could have been easily standardized, like the boss rush right before Wily. As for the Wily Fortress bosses, most of them are remixes of previous ideas. The Kame Goro Maker follows the pattern of the Bubble Machine from 1 and Pico Pico Kun from 2, a boss that isn't actually a boss but a swarm of enemies that come after you one after another. This one's fairly easy, or if you use Shadow Blade, super easy, but a good test of your dynamic vision. While the Yellow Devil Mark II doesn't look quite as good as the original, it has similar attack patterns while throwing in a few new ones, like bouncing all his blocks across the screen instead. Still can't dodge that one completely. I'd say it's comparable to the original if it wasn't for E-Tanks giving you a safety net. There's a new clone machine, not as aggressive as the last one, but with 3 copies instead, and only one being hittable at a time. While you need to act fast to find the right one, you can shred it with search snakes, so it's pretty easy. While I like all of these as expansions of previous bosses, I do think they could have made that last one a little harder to deal with, but still feel pretty positive on them overall. Then there's the Wily machine, which gets top marks in designs, looking pretty alien, but loses a lot of points when it comes to challenge. The first takes a while to waddle out, but when it does, it goes down pretty quick. I can normally wipe its health bar just as it's shooting off its second, very dodgeable attack. The second stage is pretty tricky, you having a very limited window to damage it when the main body touches down, and it being harder still if you want to use the weakness, Hard Knuckle, which has a slow startup. Really have to anticipate it with that one. Or you can just use the secret weakness, Rush Jet, to get on the cockpit's level and just spam Mega Buster. I'm kinda mixed on this. On one hand, it's really cool that you can get creative and use a power that's not intended as a weapon to completely wreck Wily. On the other, it makes it way too easy. Really wish there was a middle ground, and I should probably go back to using the Hard Knuckle, but I'm just too addicted to abusing Jet. Gamma has a similar problem. Not fighting a Wily machine or capsule, but a giant robot is, visually, easily the coolest final boss in the entire series. But when it comes to the boss itself, you can easily clear part 1 by staying center screen and using Shadow Blade, not even taking damage, and for the second, all you need to do is tap Gamma once with the top spin through your iframes to clear it. Really wish there was a bit more to this one. Overall, I'd say that Mega Man 3 is the cream of the crop, boss-wise, but it does fall off a good bit at the end. The glitches are pretty standard. There's a good deal of slowdown when there's a lot on screen, like most NES games. Still, I didn't experience too much of this when I played 2 last, so I was kinda surprised. Maybe I was using different CPU settings or something. And of course, you can despawn some stuff by moving them off screen. I always found those hornets that drop the bombs with smaller hornets in them annoying, but by taking a few steps back to the left, and suddenly they're a non-issue. It's not a cheat, it's a feature. Then, unique to this one, in Snake Man's level, there are tubes that, when you stand on them, cloud platforms rise from the top to carry you upwards. If you're unlucky, sometimes, when they reach the top, the platforms will knock you off the silos, sending you plummeting to your death. That's why I always do a hop before they reach me. Pretty normal, so I might start skipping glitches unless I find something really crazy in preceding games. Mega Man always, well, almost always, has good music, and this game isn't one of the exceptions. It might just be my favorite out of all the classic titles. Once again, the tracks are just so catchy. They're the sort that it's easy to find yourself humming or doing along to, and are also probably the easiest to put lyrics to, whether you're just making them up as you go along, listening to Magnet Man's Party Van or Career Man set the Shadow Man's theme, or the 2 albums by the Megas. They all also manage to feel otherworldly and sharper than most of the tracks from the rest of the classic titles, making them the most recognizable, but I do have a special fondness for this one, so maybe some of this is coming from my repeated playthroughs. Still though, Gemini Man's theme sounds mysterious. The rhythm in Snake Man seems to go along with the undulations of the giant serpents. The music for Top Man's makes me envision spinning, and Proto Man seems to jump and shoot to the beat when you face him in Shadow Man's stage. Magnet Man's is just always a bop. So this game is really mean. It does some pretty cruel and unusual things, and when I was looking up a bit of information on 3, I saw several complaints about the difficulty. To a degree, this is to be expected. It's a Nintendo game, and Mega Man on top of that, and those do tend to be pretty hard, especially for newcomers. Yet I think the biggest part of this title's difficulty has to do with how much the game uses the player's logic and instincts against them. Take this little pole vault guy. He runs at you, then leaps over your head. Most players' initial reaction is going to be to run forward, quite possibly with a slide, to avoid him landing on their head, but if they do that, they'll collide with the enemy's toothpick and take collision damage from that instead. Then there's parts where the game actively baits you into wasting your resources, like the Needleman revisit with all the power-ups in Reach of the Rush Jet, right before the Rush Jet section, which is going to require a lot of energy for that support mode. Or the Porcupine enemy, that rolls into a round ball but seems to still have a square hitbox. These are just a few elements that I can think of, and I wouldn't go so far as to call them unfair, but I would go back to that word I used before: mean. They certainly separate the boys from the men, or at least the uninitiated from the veterans. If you sit down and watch any random playthrough, you can almost instantly tell how much experience someone has with the game just from seeing how they deal with these obstacles. And the challenges don't stop there. There's the stuff we mentioned before with how many hits the bosses take, the stage, gimmick, hazard, and enemy combos, and the second whole round of Mega Man 2 bosses. And while some of the hard parts in previous games feel unbalanced or unintentional, the high player expectations here feel measured, at least for the most part. I could have just played this one too much though. And we can't forget about the E-tanks here either. The game can be pretty darn generous with these suckers. Sure, sometimes they're there as bait, but even with just some of the more easy to reach ones, you can amass a nice little cache of them. This can go a long way to making the game beatable for newer players, while the more experienced can use their stockpile to gauge how much they've improved. Typically, by end game, I'm sitting on around 7 of them and will just start using them, even when I can tank a few more hits on the boss rush or Gamma, since it feels like kind of a waste not to. Of course, I could be giving the game too much credit. While I think it's a nice tool that seems expertly woven into the game to make it more accessible, it could just as easily have been something the developers threw in because they didn't know how to balance the difficulty to make things seem more reasonable. Still though, I really like this game's difficulty level, going from a kid who could only get to the Doc Robot levels, maybe the first few Wily stages, to now being able to beat it in under 2 hours, even on a bad day, and constantly improving. While a lot of that might come down to me knowing how to deal with the game's malarkey, it still leaves me feeling accomplished and satisfied with my progress. You know, for the longest time, I knew this game wasn't complete, but for some reason, I thought it was due to the NES cartridges not having enough memory space to contain all the ideas they had for this one. Maybe it was the Mandela effect, maybe it was wishful thinking, maybe it was some sort of Capcom propaganda I was fed at some point. But when I was looking into this entry a bit for this video, I found out that a recent comment was right. Mega Man 3 was a rush job, and as much as I hate to admit it, it shows. This game does so much more than any of the previous games, and in many instances, the following as well, from the story, to the Doc Robots and stage remixes, to the giant frickin' robot, and yet, there are a lot of obvious holes. There should be a lot more cutscenes to contextualize stuff like the Doc Robots, and I have to question whether there shouldn't have been 8 stages for them instead of just 4, or if they didn't intend for them to be whole new levels instead of reused assets. Breakman confuses the heck out of me. I always assumed that, at that point in the game, Proto Man had broken ties with Wily, but he still needed a distraction to steal Gamma, so he slapped some of his gear on a Sniper Joe, and that's also why he goes down so much easier in that encounter. But most people treat Blues and Break like they're the same person. You fought him so many times by that point, why would he disguise himself now? Though if he did, he managed to fool at least me with how bizarre his timing was. The Wily stages are pretty short, which isn't a big deal. You already completed 12 levels by that point, and they might have just wanted to put the focus on the bosses, but it's still unusual. And there are several aspects that just don't feel fleshed out enough. We already talked about how disappointing Gamma is mechanically, and I can't help but wish there was a more complex fight where you maybe had to deal with more than just his head and a fist, where he moved around more as well. There's also the disappearing blocks, which feel really simple, almost boringly so. I hesitate to say that since I'm sure there's some out there that still have issues, but I can't imagine anyone who's contended with them in other games having issues here. It feels like they sort of just threw them in because they felt obligated, and the result was pretty uninspired. And there's probably more that I'm just not thinking of at the moment. This is a title that I really wish would get a remake, with some of these things ironed out, because as much as I love this game, only really 6 coming close, I know that it could have been so much more. It strikes me as really ironic that Capcom pushed this one out before the development team was ready, given how little they cared about the original game getting a sequel. Times change, money talks, I guess. At the end of the day, Mega Man 3 holds the ironic and seemingly contradictory position of being the most impressive and disappointing classic game for me. Despite how much I fantasize about what could have been though, I do love this game. It was a formative part of my childhood, its sense of style blows me away more than any other in the series, Prepping for this review, I was listening to history repeating by the Megas and getting pumped. I always have a blast playing this one. My improvement with this title is one of the most defining in my career as a gamer, and if I had to rank all the Mega Man games across all series, this would make it into my top 5. No easy feat given my love of the franchise. While some may call this one overrated, and I'm certainly not immune to bias, for me, Mega Man 3 is absolutely worth the hype. But what do you think? Am I overselling it? Are there some things you like, but some you hate? Do you think the whole thing is trash? And is Shadow Man cooler than Cut Man? Really hard for me to be objective about this one, but I hope I managed to get the gist of it out there competently enough. Regardless, thanks for watching, maybe consider subscribing if you're into Mega Man, and perhaps I'll see you in the next one. For everlasting peace.